last night we did see the largest Ukrainian drone attack of the war on Russian facilities around Novorossiysk and Krasnodar Krai, and they were, by all accounts, very successful. So we are seeing the Ukrainian ability to hit targets deep within Russia and to make, they've reduced Russian refinery capability by about 15%, according to independent analysis. So the Ukrainians are striking back.
International news now, and Russian drones have struck Ukraine's second biggest city, Kharkiv, during now what is the longest air raid alert since the start of Russia's invasion. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who earlier this week had said he'd cancelled all foreign visits, says the situation is now under control, with Ukraine's defence forces keeping Russian troops at bay. Jimmy Rushton is a Kyiv-based foreign policy and security analyst who joins us this afternoon. Jimmy, just talk us through the real realities in Kharkiv. What's happening?
Well, the city has been under almost consistent air assault for the last several months, and we've seen drones, cruise missiles, heavy artillery hitting the city, and it's making life very difficult for the population. We've already seen the main power station that provides power for Kharkiv that's been completely destroyed. And now the Russian troops are pushing, they've pushed across the border in two locations, one directly to the north of Kharkiv, one to the northeast. And we believe the aim is to bring Kharkiv within tube-based artillery range, at which point they'll probably go back to bombarding the city with, conventional artillery, which is significantly more destructive and cheaper than launching drones and cruise missiles.
Yeah, I mean, how damaged is the ability of Ukraine to be able to defend itself?
They still have a significant ability to defend themselves, but unfortunately, as we saw in the recent incursions into Kharkiv Oblast, they're fighting with one hand tied behind their backs in many cases, because the Ukrainians saw the Russians building up forces on the Russian side of the border, but because of restrictions imposed on Ukraine by some Western partners, particularly the United States, they weren't able to use Western-supplied weapons to strike these concentrations of troops. They also weren't able to prepare the defenses in the way that they would like, because as they were trying to prepare these defenses, they were struck by Russian artillery firing from the Russian side of the border. Again, they couldn't use their most sophisticated Western artillery to fire back because of these restrictions imposed upon Ukraine. So they had to dig the trenches and fortifications mainly at night without the use of heavy engineering equipment. And as we saw, they weren't sufficient, unfortunately.
Yeah. This week seems to have been a success story for Russia rather than Ukraine. And if we kind of take the wider picture of what's been happening in Kharkiv and elsewhere along the front line, what does it say about Ukraine's sort of ability at this point to stave off further imminent Russian advances?
In some cases, that's true. I mean, last night we did see the largest Ukrainian drone attack of the war on Russian facilities around Novorossiysk and Krasnodar Krai, and they were, by all accounts, very successful. So we are seeing the Ukrainian ability to hit targets deep within Russia and to make, they've reduced Russian refinery capability by about 15%, according to independent analysis. So the Ukrainians are striking back, and the situation in other sectors of the front, particularly around Chasiv Yar, has become far more stable. The problem is, again, that they are fighting, particularly in areas close to the Russian border, or in Kharkiv Oblast, with one hand tied behind their back. They don't have enough air defense. We're seeing Russian aircraft launching glide bombs from, say, 40 kilometers behind the line, where realistically most Ukrainian air defense can't touch them, and these are decimating Ukrainian defense positions. So, it is very tough. The Ukrainians, there's still a very, very strong fighting spirit, but they need additional Western help, and there also needs to be probably reforms in the Ukrainian military to enable them to fight more effectively.
Yeah, Jimmy. Thank you. Jimmy Rushton, Kyiv-based foreign policy and security analyst. We're going to look at this in a bit more context later on. Putin's obviously been in China for the last 2 days, soliciting support from, well, maybe the one person, the one body, Xi Jinping, who can help stave off the threat of those Western sanctions, the Western support to Ukraine. How significant is that relationship?
Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv, has been struck by several drones during the country's longest air raid alert since Russia launched its full-scale invasion. The city's been facing a major onslaught from Russia, whose troops have made big advances in the last few days. The Times correspondent Maxim Tucker is in the region.
I was in Vovchansk this week, as well as Litsy, which is a really key village for the Ukrainians. They're trying to hold on to that to prevent the Russians getting their barrel artillery within range of Kharkiv city centre, and the Russians are throwing infantry forward, trying to infiltrate Ukrainian lines, get round and get behind Ukrainian positions, while hammering them with long-range artillery and long-range glide bombs dropped from jets, perhaps as far away as 80 kilometres. The most vital Western aid is air defences. The Ukrainians really need more Patriot missiles, and they need more Patriot missile systems, and that's abundantly clear here in Kharkiv, which is attacked hourly by Russian jets. I'm listening to an air raid alert now, and I can hear Ukrainian air defence engaging with drones and possibly some missiles that are being fired into the centre of Kharkiv from only 10 miles away across the border. And it's really vital that Ukraine has the anti-aircraft missiles it needs to defend itself. I've noticed that it really depends on who you talk to, on how optimistic they are. I mean, Ukrainian special forces and assault brigades and volunteers that have joined up, they really understand why they're fighting, and they remain motivated. They're motivated by each other. They fight for each other. And people who are conscripted and mobilised and drafted into the army are not motivated to the same extent, and tend to feel the negative effects of being shelled far more quickly and feel pessimistic about it. And some of that infects the civilian population. And I think it's the same extent if people are very well connected to volunteers, they feel a sense of purpose and they understand what they're doing. And if people are connected to conscripted men, they're very worried about their safety and when they're going to come back.
Well, it's been a fascinating week when it comes to what is happening in Ukraine. An alarming week in many ways as well. Russian forces seizing over 100 square miles of Ukrainian territory within the space of this week. So, Russia's biggest advances in more than a year. We'll keep you up to date on Times Radio. And of course, if you've got a digital subscription to the Times, then you can click through the articles that are being provided by reporters like Maxim in the region.
Доброго дня. Підкажіть, будь ласка, огляд вам робили?
Ні. Прошу.